Why are you betraying?
I'm sorry I was sent to destroy you. I can't do this.
Then walk away.
They'll kill me if I stop.
The rain didn't just fall. It shattered against the pavement of the Seoul alleyway, turning the neon glow of the city into a distorted, bleeding mess of blue and pink. Ryu Do-hwan stood perfectly still, the fabric of his $5,000 suit absorbing the damp chill, though he didn't feel it. His eyes were locked on the woman standing 10 feet away, the woman he had spent the last 6 months loving under a false name. Beck-era's hands were slick with rain and sweat as she gripped the heavy black handgun. Her natural curls were weighed down by the storm, clinging to her forehead, and her breath came in ragged, visible gasps. She looked less like an assassin and more like a sacrificial lamb. Her simple green jacket, once a symbol of her practical, hard-working life, was now soaked through, making her appear smaller, more fragile. Do-jun, she whispered, the name a broken plea. Her finger hovered near the trigger, trembling so violently that the barrel of the gun danced in the dim light. They said you were a monster. They said if I didn't do this, they'd kill my brother. But you're just a delivery driver. You're just the man who brought me tea when I was sick. Do-hwan didn't flinch. He didn't signal the 3 shadows standing motionless in the darkness behind him, men with silenced weapons who could have ended this in a heartbeat. Instead, he took a slow, deliberate step forward. The splashing of his leather shoes sounded like a gunshot in the narrow space. "The man who brought you tea is standing right here, Era," he said, his voice dropping into a low, terrifyingly calm register. "But the name is Ryu Do-hwan. And the monsters you were told about? They work for me. Or they fear me." Era's eyes widened, a fresh wave of tears spilling over as the realization hit her like a physical blow. The Do-jun she had shared cheap ramen and quiet dreams with was a ghost, a fiction created by the king of the very underworld she was being crushed by. The man she loved was the legendary boss of the Ryu Syndicate. "Kill me, then," Do-hwan challenged, his voice devoid of malice. He stopped just inches from the muzzle, the cold metal nearly touching the silk of his tie. He looked at her with an intensity that stripped away the Mafia boss and the delivery boy, leaving only the man. "If this is the only way your brother lives, pull the trigger. But look at me when you do it. Don't kill the lie, Era. Kill the man." Era's lips trembled, her knuckles white. The power dynamic in the alleyway shifted. The man with the army was at the mercy of the girl with the shaking hands. The silence between them was a physical weight, heavier than the rain, as she stared into the eyes of the person she was sent to destroy, searching for the soul of the man who had promised her a future. The transition from Ryu Do-hwan to the man known as Do-jun began not with a wardrobe change, but with a profound sense of exhaustion that no amount of wealth could cure. 6 months before the rain-slicked standoff, Do-hwan sat in his high-rise office, the glass walls offering a panoramic view of a city he owned yet felt entirely disconnected from. The air-conditioned silence was stifling, broken only by the cold, calculated reports of shipping manifests and rival eliminations. He looked at his reflection in the window, a man encased in a charcoal suit that felt more like a burial shroud, and realized he couldn't remember the last time he had felt a genuine emotion that wasn't rooted in survival or power. The transformation was meticulous. He didn't just put on old clothes. He curated a new existence. In a derelict district far from the neon-lit towers of a syndicate, he rented a room that smelled of cedar and old radiator steam. He traded his fleet of armored sedans for a battered delivery scooter that rattled with every pothole, its engine a frantic heartbeat beneath him. He swapped his tailored shirts for faded hoodies and a high-visibility vest that rendered him invisible. In the underworld, prominence was safety. In the real world, being overlooked was the ultimate freedom. As Du Jun, his days were measured in the weight of cardboard boxes and the numbing repetition of stairwells. He learned the specific ache of a back strained by labor rather than the mental toll of a boardroom. He enjoyed the anonymity of the crowded streets, where people looked through him rather than at him. For the first time in 30 years, there was no target on his back, only the simple mission of getting a package from one door to the next. It was during a grueling double shift, with his fingers numb from the biting wind, that he pulled his scooter up to a 24-hour laundromat. The fluorescent hum of the machines was the only soundtrack to the lonely hour. He was just a man in a salt-stained jacket, looking for a moment of warmth when he saw her. Beck-Era was folding a mountain of white linens, her movements rhythmic and graceful despite the late hour. She didn't see a king or a threat. She saw a tired worker who looked like he'd forgotten to eat. When she offered him a spare cup of coffee with a smile that reached her eyes, Du-hwan felt a terrifying flicker of life in his chest. He took the cup, his calloused hands brushing hers, and for the first time, he didn't want to be the man in the high-rise. He wanted to be exactly who she thought he was. The laundromat was a cavern of flickering fluorescent tubes and the rhythmic, metallic thrum of spinning drums, a stark contrast to the silent, marble-floored world Du-hwan had left behind. He stepped inside, the bell above the door chiming a lonely note that was swallowed by the heat of the dryers. He felt the grit of the city on his skin, his hands raw from gripping the handlebars of the scooter in the biting wind. He was Du Jun now, a man whose presence was defined by the steam rising from his damp hoodie and the exhaustion etched into his shoulders. That was when he saw her. Beck-Era sat on a plastic bench, her frame enveloped in a simple, muted green jacket that seemed to hold the only warmth in the room. She was surrounded by the domestic chaos of a long day, baskets of linens and a dog-eared book resting on her knee. But she moved with a quiet, grounded grace that stopped his breath. Her natural curls were pulled back, framing a face that held no artifice, only a weary kind of strength. When she looked up, she didn't see the feared head of the Ryu syndicate. She didn't see a threat or a bank account. She saw a man who looked like the cold had settled into his bones. "The heater in the corner actually works if you stand right next to it," she said, her voice a soft melody that cut through the mechanical hum. She didn't wait for him to respond before she stood, reaching into a small bag and pulling out a thermos. "And you look like you've been chasing the wind all night." Rough shift. Du-hwan hesitated, his instincts screaming to remain guarded, to keep the walls of his curated persona high. But there was something in her gaze, a raw, realistic kindness, that made the armor feel heavy and unnecessary. He moved toward her, the scent of industrial detergent mixing with the faint, sweet aroma of the coffee she poured into a plastic cup. "Something like that," he managed to say, his voice raspy from disuse. As he took the cup, his fingers brushed against hers. The contact was electric, a jolt of genuine human warmth that felt more dangerous than any blade he had ever faced. She smiled then, a small, tired expression that reached her eyes and stayed there, offering him a seat in her world. In that moment, the high-rise offices and the blood-stained ledgers felt like a fever dream. Under the harsh lights of the laundromat, standing next to the girl in the green jacket, Ryu Du-hwan realized he wasn't just faking a life. He was finally starting to want one. The kindness Era offered in the laundromat was real, but the circumstances that brought her there were rooted in a cold, systemic cruelty. 2 weeks before she ever handed a cup of coffee to the man she knew as Du Jun, she had been standing in the back of a dim, refrigerated warehouse, the scent of frozen fish and industrial salt clinging to her clothes. Across from her sat Park Shin-woo, a man whose smile never quite reached his eyes, and who held a folder containing the precarious details of her life like a deck of marked cards. Era's brother, Marcus, had always been the dreamer, the one who saw a way out through fast cars and easy money, only to find himself buried under a mountain of debt to the wrong people. Park didn't want the money back. He wanted a key. He showed Era a blurred photograph of Ryu Duhuan, a man who looked like a shadow carved from stone. He's bored. Park had told her, his voice a smooth, oily purr. He's looking for something authentic, something he thinks he can't buy. You're going to give that to him, Era. You're going to be his sanctuary. The trap was honey-coated, built on the slow burn of orchestrated proximity. Park's faction had mapped Duhuan's delivery routes, identified his favorite late-night stops, and timed Era's coincidental presence to the second. Every interaction at the laundromat, every shy smile and shared story about her upbringing was a brick in a wall she was forced to build. She was a natural at it, not because she was a predator, but because her empathy was a weapon she didn't know how to dull. But as the days bled into weeks, the meetings with Park became more agonizing. She would meet his couriers in crowded subway stations, exchanging envelopes of observations for the continued safety of her brother. Each time she reported that Du-jun was opening up, a piece of her soul withered. She was falling in love with a man she was supposed to lead to the slaughter, yet she was also falling deeper into a debt of blood. She would return to her small apartment and stare at the green jacket hanging by the door, the garment that had become her uniform of deception. In the quiet hours, she wondered if the man with the tired eyes and the delivery scooter was also hiding behind a mask, or if she was the only one in their world of two who was fundamentally a lie. The weight of the gun she had yet to receive felt phantom heavy against her hip, a silent reminder that in Park's world, love was just another word for leverage. The small, steam-fogged windows of the neighborhood ramen shop felt like the boundaries of a private universe, far removed from the predatory shadows of the city. Inside, sitting on mismatched stools at a scarred wooden counter, Ryu Duhuan and Beck Era shared a single large bowl of spicy noodles, the heat of the broth and the closeness of their shoulders creating an intimacy that felt almost holy. As Duhuan found himself talking about things the Mafia boss hadn't considered in decades. The sound of the ocean, the books he'd read in the quiet of his rented room, and the strange, fluttering hope that a man could simply start over. Era listened with an intensity that made him feel truly seen, her chin resting in her hand, the green jacket draped over the back of her chair. Between bites, she spoke of her own dreams, her voice soft and thick with a vulnerability that tore at his heart. She talked about opening a community garden where the kids in the neighborhood could see something grow besides concrete and iron. She spoke of a life where safety wasn't something you had to bargain for with your soul. In the flickering amber light of the shop, her face held a raw, realistic beauty that made the diamonds of his former life seem like shards of common glass. "Promises are expensive where I come from," Duhuan said, his voice dropping to a low, honest rasp as he looked into her dark, soulful eyes. "But I want to make one to you, Era. When the weather turns warm, I'm taking you away from all of this. Just a place with no sirens and no deadlines. Somewhere we can just be." Era's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of profound sadness crossing her features before she masked it with a nod. She reached across the counter, her hand covering his, the rough, calloused hand of a delivery driver. "I'd like that, Du-jun," she whispered, though the weight of her secret pressed against her chest like a physical bruise. To her, every promise felt like a countdown. Every one was overshadowed by the if dictated by her handlers. They walked back to her apartment through the cool night air, their fingers interlaced, a silent pact formed in the steam of the noodle shop. Duhuan felt a lightness he hadn't known since childhood, convinced that he had finally bought his way into a world of truth. He didn't see the black sedan idling at the end of the block, nor did he feel the cold steel of the burner phone vibrating in Era's pocket. A silent reminder from Park Shin-woo that the honey-coated trap was about to spring shut. For one beautiful, fragile hour, they weren't a predator and a pawn. They were just two people believing in a future that was already being dismantled. The romantic haze of the ramen shop was shattered by the cold, digital chirp of a phone that Era had come to loathe. It was the following evening, and the air in her small apartment felt thin, as if the walls were closing in to witness her final descent. When she answered, there was no greeting, only the clipped, administrative tone of Park's lead enforcer. The warehouse on 4th and Industrial. 11 p.m. They'll be there for a special delivery at the back loading dock. Finish it, or we move on your brother by midnight. The meeting place for her final instructions was a parked sedan under a buzzing, dying streetlight. Park didn't even roll down the window fully. He merely cracked it enough to slide a heavy, cold object wrapped in a microfiber cloth through the gap. Era took it, her fingers recoiling at the oily, metallic scent of the handgun. It felt heavier than it looked, a dense weight of finality that seemed to pull at her very soul. Along with the weapon came a slip of paper with a single set of coordinates and a photo of Du Huan. Not the Du Jun she knew, but a grainy, high-angle shot of him entering a black SUV. He's playing a game with you, Era. Park's voice drifted from the dark interior of the car, sounding like gravel over silk. A man like that doesn't love. He collects. You're just a curiosity to him. Don't let your heart get in the way of your survival. Era stood on the cracked sidewalk long after the car sped away, the silhouette of the gun visible through the thin fabric of her green jacket. She felt a nauseating vertigo. To save her brother, she had to destroy the only person who had ever made her feel like she was more than a statistic of the city's struggle. The final order wasn't just a command to pull a trigger. It was a demand to execute the version of herself that had dared to believe in the ramen shop promises. She walked toward the industrial district, her footsteps echoing against the corrugated metal of the surrounding fences. Every block she covered felt like a betrayal of the tea he brought her, the warmth of his hand, and the quiet dreams they had shared. By the time the rusted skeleton of the warehouse came into view, the rain had begun to fall, a light, mocking drizzle that blurred her vision. She reached into her pocket and gripped the cold steel, her heart screaming a protest that her mind couldn't afford to hear. The trap was set, the hunter was waiting, and the man she loved was walking directly into the center of a target she was forced to paint. While Era was being handed the cold weight of her final order, Ryu Du-hwan was standing in her small, dimly lit apartment, surrounded by the scent of her vanilla candles and the lingering warmth of a home he had grown to crave. He had let himself in with the spare key she'd given him, a gesture of trust that had made the Mafia boss feel more powerful than any territorial conquest. He had come to surprise her with groceries for a real dinner, a quiet celebration of a life he was increasingly desperate to make permanent. But the king within him was never truly asleep. As he set a bag of vegetables on the counter, his eyes, trained by a lifetime of paranoia and survival, caught a microscopic glint of light from the underside of the wooden kitchen table. It was a silver sliver, no larger than a grain of rice, nestled in the shadow of a joint. Du-hwan's breath hitched, not out of fear, but out of a sudden, nauseating clarity. He didn't need to touch it to know what it was, a high-end, military-grade listening device. Slowly, he reached under the table, his fingers brushing the cold adhesive. His mind raced through the possibilities, his heart pleading for it to be a mistake, but the precision of the placement spoke of professional surveillance. He didn't stop there. With the methodical efficiency of a man who had searched 1,000 rooms for betrayal, he began to sweep the apartment. He found the second bug behind the framed photo of Era's brother on the mantel, and a third tucked into the lining of the spare green jacket hanging by the door. The silence of the apartment suddenly felt predatory. Du-hwan stood in the center of the room, the Dujun hoodie he wore feeling like a mocking costume. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. Era wasn't just a girl in a laundromat. She was a target, or worse, a conduit. He looked at the photo of her brother, noticing for the first time the subtle tension in the boy's posture. The same tension he had seen in Era's eyes during their ramen shop promises. He realized then that the rival park faction hadn't just found him. They had used the only thing he had ever loved as a Trojan horse. The rage that simmered beneath his ribs was cold and sharp, directed not at Era, but the world that refused to let him be anything other than a monster. He didn't leave. He didn't call his guards to burn the building down. Instead, he sat in the darkness of her kitchen, the bugs lined up on the table before him like tiny, metallic accusations, waiting for the woman he loved to come home and tell him which version of the truth was going to kill them both. The rain had transitioned from a drizzle to a relentless downpour by the time Era reached the abandoned warehouse on 4th and Industrial. The skeletal remains of the crane overhead groaned in the wind, sounding like a dying beast. Every muscle in her body screamed for her to turn back, but the ghost of her brother's face, bruised and terrified in Park's photographs, pushed her forward. She reached the back-loading dock, her hand trembling inside her pocket as it gripped the cold, heavy steel of the weapon. A single delivery scooter was parked near the bay, its headlight cutting a weak, flickering path through the mist. There, standing by the rusted rolling door, was the man she had loved for 6 months. But as she stepped into the light, the Dujun she expected to see was gone. He wasn't wearing his salt-stained hoodie or the high-visibility vest. He stood tall in a charcoal wool overcoat, his posture radiating a terrifying, regal stillness that made the surrounding decay feel like his throne room. Era, he said, his voice carrying effortlessly over the thunder. It wasn't the soft, tired rasp of a delivery driver. It was the voice of a man used to commanding silence. "Stop," she choked out, pulling the gun from her jacket. The weight of it nearly tipped her over. She held it with both hands, the barrel swaying as tears blurred her vision. "Don't come any closer. They're watching. They'll kill Marcus if I don't finish this." Duhuan didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't even flinch as she leveled the sights at his chest. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small handful of metallic debris, the bugs he had stripped from her apartment, and let them clatter onto the wet concrete. "The men who are watching you through these are already dead, Era. My people found them 10 minutes ago." The air felt electric, the ozone of the storm mixing with the sudden, sharp realization of her failure. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "I am the man you were sent to kill," he said, stepping into the direct line of her fire. Behind him, 3 black SUVs rolled silently out of the darkness, their headlights illuminating a small army of men in tailored suits. They stood like statues, weapons ready, waiting for a single nod from the man in the center. "My name is Ryu Duhuan, and the Dujun you loved was the only part of me that was ever truly alive." Era's finger tightened on the trigger, her heart a drumbeat of agony. The man she loved was a lie, and the man standing before her was a monster. Yet, as he looked at her with eyes that held no malice, only a profound, weary sadness, she realized he was giving her the choice he never had. He was offering her his life to save her brothers, or his protection to save them both. The gun felt like a mountain in her hands as the night of the long knives began, the hunters now becoming the hunted in the shadows of the warehouse. The transition from the rain-lashed warehouse to the clinical, silent luxury of Ryu Duhuan's mountain estate felt like a fever dream. Era sat in the back of the armored SUV, her hands still vibrating with a phantom chill, staring at the man beside her. He had stripped off his wet overcoat, revealing the crisp, white shirt of a monarch, yet he remained as still as a statue. The gun was gone, taken by one of his faceless men, but the weight of it still pressed against her soul. When the heavy iron gates of the compound hissed shut behind them, Era felt a sudden, sharp spike of claustrophobia. The estate was a masterpiece of glass and stone, perched on a cliffside like an eagle's nest, surrounded by high-security fences and guards who moved with the synchronized lethargy of apex predators. It was beautiful, but it was a fortress. "You're safe here," Duhuan said, his voice cutting through the hum of the car's engine. He didn't look at her. His gaze was fixed on the monitors built into the seat in front of him, scrolling through thermal feeds of the perimeter. "Am I?" Era's voice was a ragged whisper. She looked at the sprawling mansion, then back at the man who had lied to her for 6 months. "Safe from Park? Maybe. But what about you? Am I a guest? Or am I just another piece of evidence you've secured?" Duhuan finally turned, his dark eyes unreadable in the dim cabin light. "In my world, there is no difference. Until I dismantle the faction that put that weapon in your hand, this is the only place in Korea where you and your brother are untouchable." He led her through the vast, echoing halls to a suite that overlooked the valley. The room was filled with every comfort imaginable: silk linens, warm lighting, a terrace that touched the clouds. But to Era, it felt like a gilded cage. She stood by the window, watching the rain continue to fall far below, feeling the distance between the girl who loved a delivery driver and the woman trapped in a Mafia king's lair. "My brother," she pressed, her heart hammering against her ribs. The destruction of the Ryu syndicate began not with a gunshot, but with a digital signature. In the heavy, shadowed silence of his study, Ryu Duhuan sat before a series of encrypted monitors, his fingers moving with the cold precision of a man dismantling a bomb. He was no longer playing the part of delivery driver, nor was he clinging to the crown that had become his cage. To save Era and her brother, he had to do the unthinkable. He had to destroy the very empire he had spent a lifetime building. The plan was a scorched earth strategy designed to erase both the Park faction and his own criminal legacy in a single, synchronized strike. By leaking 30 years of laundered assets and offshore accounts to federal investigators, he turned his own wealth into a poison chalice. He watched as the shell companies tied to Park Shin-woo began to blink red on the screen, frozen by international authorities. It was a masterpiece of self-sabotage. By exposing the rivals, he was effectively signing his own arrest warrant, ensuring that the name Ryu Duhuan would become synonymous with the greatest collapse in the history of the Korean underworld. "You're burning everything," a voice whispered from the doorway. Duhuan didn't turn to see Era standing there, her silhouette framed by the dim light of the hallway. "A throne built on blood can only be purified by fire," he said, his voice a low, resolute rasp. "As long as the Ryu name carries power, you will always be a target. As long as I am a king, you are a pawn. Tonight, I abdicate." He hit the final keystroke, sending a decade of incriminating evidence to the desk of a prosecutor who had spent 20 years trying to catch him. As the data uploaded, he stood and walked toward her, the flickering blue light of the monitors casting long, jagged shadows against the wall. He reached out, his hand hovering near her cheek before he hesitated, remembering the gun she had held in the rain. "The reputation I spent my life protecting is gone," he said softly. "By sunrise, the police will be at the gates, and the Park faction will be in chains. We have 5 hours to disappear before Ryu Duhuan ceases to exist." Era reached up, catching his hand and pressing it to her face, her tears warm against his skin. The burning of the throne wasn't just a strategic move. It was an act of radical vulnerability. He was stripping himself of his armor, his wealth, and his name, offering her the only thing he had left, the truth of the man who had once brought her tea in a laundromat. In the dying light of his empire, they stood together, Two ghosts preparing to walk out of the flames and into a world where they could finally be nothing to everyone else and everything to each other. A year had passed since the night the Ryu Syndicate dissolved into a heap of digital ash and headlines. In a quiet, coastal town far from the jagged skyline of Seoul, the morning sun rose over a small, unassuming storefront. There were no black sedans idling at the curb, no men in earpieces patrolling the perimeter, and no heavy iron gates to separate the inhabitants from the world. Instead, there was the scent of roasting coffee and the sound of a bell chiming as the first customer of the day stepped inside. Ryu Du-hwan, now known simply as June, adjusted his apron, the fabric a soft, worn cotton that felt more natural than any silk tie ever had. He moved with a relaxed, steady grace, his hands no longer tightened into fists but busy with the honest labor of the morning rush. He was the man who fixed the espresso machine, the one who knew exactly how the elderly neighbor liked her tea, and the one who finally slept without a weapon beneath his pillow. The king had not just abdicated. He had been reborn into the very anonymity he once used as a disguise. Beck-era emerged from the small kitchen in the back, her green jacket replaced by a bright, floral apron that mirrored the vibrant community garden she had started in the vacant lot next door. She looked at him, and the reflection in her eyes was no longer clouded by the terror of a hidden gun or the weight of a brother's debt. Marcus was there, too, healthy and safe, whistling as he wiped down the outdoor tables. The life they had built was humble, measured in the growth of tomato vines and the steady hum of a peaceful neighborhood. But to Du-hwan, it was the most magnificent empire he had ever commanded. As the afternoon light began to stretch across the wooden floor, Era joined him behind the counter. He reached out, his hand finding hers, and this time there was no jolt of fear, only the grounding warmth of a truth that had finally set them both free. He was no longer faking poor to find love. He had found a wealth that couldn't be stored in a vault or traded on a market. In the quiet of their shared sanctuary, the former Mafia boss realized that the delivery boy hadn't just returned. He had finally arrived at his true destination. The story of Ryu, Du-hwan, and Beck-era reaches its quiet, profound conclusion not in a world of grand gestures, but in the deliberate, daily choice to be honest. Their journey serves as a powerful testament to the idea that the masks we wear, whether crafted out of a desire for protection, power, or even a misguided attempt to find love, are ultimately the very things that keep us from being truly known. Du-hwan's initial deception, though rooted in a romanticized longing for something real, nearly cost him the very life he sought to save. It reminds us that a relationship built on a foundation of sand cannot withstand the tide of reality. True intimacy requires the radical and often terrifying risk of total transparency. There is a deep educational value in Era's resilience, illustrating that being caught in a system of coercion does not strip a person of their inherent morality. Her story teaches us that redemption is found in the moment one chooses the difficult truth over a comfortable lie, even when the stakes are as high as survival itself. She moved from being a pawn in a high-stakes game of shadows to being the co-architect of a life built on mutual respect and shared labor. The final lesson of their improbable union is that true power is not found in the ability to command an empire, but in the courage to walk away from it. Du-hwan learned that his throne was actually his greatest barrier to peace, and that the only way to truly protect those he loved was to dismantle the status that made them targets. By burning down the Ryu name, he discovered that he didn't need a crown to be a man of substance. As they stand together in their coastal sanctuary, the moral is clear. Love is not a transaction, and safety is not a fortress. True royalty is found in the soul kitchen of everyday life, in the kindness shown to a stranger, the patience required to grow a garden, and the unwavering honesty shared between two people who no longer have anything to hide. Their story concludes with a simple, enduring truth. We're never more powerful than when we finally dare to be ourselves.